Sunday dinner. Same roast. Same good plates, the ones that only came out for company and for Brent. Same chair that had been mine since high school, the one with the wobble in the back left leg that nobody had ever bothered to fix because it was only my chair. Dad reached into the sideboard like he was pulling out a birthday card. It wasn't a card. It was a thick white envelope. Cashier's check energy. The kind of envelope that makes a room go quiet for the wrong reasons, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paper weight. He slid it across the table to my brother Brent. Mom didn't look at me when she said it. She said it to the salad bowl. Soft. Final. Like weather. You can rent somewhere. You've always been fine. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I remember the exact weight of it in my hand, the little tremor I forced still. I didn't flip the table. I didn't cry into the mashed potatoes. I didn't ask them to explain the math of love out loud, to show their work the way they'd have made me show mine on a report card. I set the fork down. And I started counting nights. If you're new here, this is Calm Verdict. Quiet Power. Final Reverse. On the record. This is the story of a $60,000 envelope that skipped me. A sentence that assigned me a smaller life without ever asking if I wanted it. And a closing day nobody in my family got an invitation to, because I never sent one. I didn't win with a speech. I won with a deed. By the time they needed my help bailing out the golden child's gift, my name was already on a title, my signature was already dry on a mortgage, and their favorite story about me, the tough one, the fine one, the one who never needs anything, was already out of date. They just didn't know it yet. I want to walk you through every night, every skipped vacation, every silence I chose on purpose, because the specificity is the whole point. This isn't a story about luck. It's a story about arithmetic, and about what happens when the person everyone assumes is fine quietly stops being fine on anyone's schedule but her own. Some of you already know this story before I finish telling it, because you've lived a version of it yourselves, the sibling who got the safety net, and the one who got told the net was for people who actually needed it. Stay with me through the parts that feel slow. The slow parts are where the actual house gets built. My name is Jordan Hale. I'm 34. I work nights. I keep people alive between midnight and dawn in a hospital that never fully sleeps, and I keep myself alive on 12-hour blocks, bad vending machine coffee, and the particular kind of stubbornness you only get from watching a lot of people run out of time. In my family, I was the one who didn't need anything. Not because I had everything. Because I complained the least, and somewhere along the way, my family confused those two things and never bothered to correct themselves. Let me give you the actual math, because the favored one doesn't mean anything until you hear the specifics laid end to end. Brent needed cleats every single season, name brand, because the school ones fell apart. Brent needed a car at 17, and then a better car at 19 after the first one didn't work out, which was family code for he'd wrecked it showing off on a back road and nobody wanted to say that part out loud. Brent needed help with a semester that somehow always cost more than the tuition website said it should, some mysterious gap between what the school billed and what Dad ended up writing a check for. Brent needed a wedding that looked like a magazine spread, string lights and a live band and a video montage set to music, and a down payment on a honeymoon that looked like the opening act of a whole future. I needed understanding, apparently. And understanding is free. So they gave me lots of it, generously, the way you give away something that costs you absolutely nothing. Jordan's got a good head. Jordan's tough. Jordan's always been fine. I heard those 3 sentences so many times across so many years that they started to feel less like compliments and more like a diagnosis nobody had actually examined me for. I remember one specific night, back when I was 26, working a double in the ICU, calling my mother on my one real break of the shift just to hear a voice that wasn't hooked up to a monitor. I told her I was exhausted, that I'd lost a patient that night, a man about my father's age, and that I just needed 5 minutes of someone asking how I was doing. She listened for maybe 90 seconds before pivoting, gently, the way she always pivoted, into how worried she was about Brent's job situation, how he was really struggling with a manager who didn't appreciate him. I said something comforting about Brent. I always said something comforting about Brent. I hung up the phone in an empty break room and went back to work, because that's what tough looks like from the outside, and nobody in my family had ever once asked what it looked like from the inside. There's another memory that sits right next to that phone call, from years earlier, back when I was maybe 16. I needed braces, actual medically recommended braces, an overbite the orthodontist said would only get more expensive to fix the longer we waited. Dad sat at the kitchen table with the estimate and did the thing he always did when a bill involved me specifically. He sighed, long and heavy, like the number itself had personally inconvenienced him, and said we'd see how the year went. The year went the way it always went. Brent got a truck for his 16th birthday 4 months later, used but recently detailed, with a bow someone had actually tied around the side mirror for the photo. My teeth stayed the way they were. I straightened my own smile out mentally, the way you learn to do, by deciding it wasn't worth the argument. Even the vocabulary in our house was rationed differently depending on who needed encouragement. Brent got "you can do anything you set your mind to" before every exam, every tryout, every job interview. I got "you'll figure it out, you always do," which sounds similar out loud but does something very different to a person over 20 years. One phrase hands you a future. The other hands you a job description. Fine is not a financial plan. Fine is what you call a daughter when you've already spent the plan on someone else, and you need a word that sounds like a compliment instead of a confession. There was a summer, the one after I finished nursing school, when my car transmission went out completely, right in the middle of my first year on the floor, back when every single shift mattered for building seniority. I asked Dad if he could help with a used replacement, just a loan, something I fully intended to pay back on a schedule, in writing if he wanted it in writing. He told me he'd think about it, which in our house was a polite, unhurried version of no. I ended up taking the bus to the hospital for 6 weeks, leaving my apartment at 4 in the morning for a 7 a.m. shift, standing at a cold stop in the dark more times than I can count. That same summer, Brent's transmission went out too, on the truck he'd gotten for his 16th birthday, and Dad had it towed and repaired within 4 days, no conversation required, like it was simply what fathers do. I don't say any of this to paint myself as some flawless martyr. I had my own stretches of resentment I handled badly, snapped at Mom over things that weren't really about the dishes or the schedule, went quiet at family functions in ways that probably looked like moodiness from the outside instead of what it actually was. I'm human. I just also happen to be the human in this family who was handed the least and asked to be the most grateful about it. If you've ever been praised for how little you require, stay with me. This one's for you. Dad cleared his throat like a man making a toast at his own retirement party. Mark, it's hot. Brent and Ashley are ready. This is an investment in family. $60,000. Not a loan paper. Not a contract. Not a "we'll do the same for Jordan next year" calendar invite penciled in anywhere I could see it. A gift with a spotlight, presented at a dinner, timed for maximum applause. I waited until the congratulations landed, until the room did its full lap of joy. Until Mom wiped under her eyes with the corner of a cloth napkin like she was in a commercial for family togetherness. Until Brent did that humble laugh people do when they get exactly what they expected and want credit for looking surprised about it anyway. Ashley squeezed his arm and mouthed something at him that I didn't catch and didn't need to. My Aunt Carol, who'd come along for the dinner, actually reached across the table and squeezed my hand at one point, misreading my silence for happiness on my brother's behalf, and said, "Isn't it wonderful, watching your baby brother get everything he's worked for?" I said yes. It was the fastest, smallest lie of the whole evening, and it wouldn't be the last one I told that table before the night was over. Then I asked, calm, even, nurse voice, the same voice I used to deliver bad news to a family in a waiting room, because some part of me already knew this was going to require that exact register. "Is there a path for me too?" Not a demand. A question. An honest, small, reasonable question, the kind you'd think a parent could answer without flinching. Mom smiled the way people smile when a child asks for the moon after bedtime, indulgent and a little tired, like the question itself was the cute part. "Honey, you've always been fine renting. It's easier for you. No lawn. No pressure. You're not in the same season." Same season. He was 31. I was 34. The season, apparently, was called sun. I nodded once. "Okay. That okay is going to bother some of you." Good. I needed them to believe I was still the girl who absorbs disappointment without filing it, the one who nods and clears her plate and doesn't make Sunday dinner uncomfortable. Because I was about to file everything, every single word of that conversation, in a place none of them would ever think to look. I helped clear the table that night, same as always, rinsed the good plates by hand because Mom didn't trust the dishwasher with them, and drove home with the radio off, replaying same season over and over until it stopped sounding like an explanation and started sounding like exactly what it was, a door quietly closing, dressed up as a comfort. I drove back to my rental in silence, no radio, no podcast, just the sound of my own tires and my own thinking. 1 bedroom. Thin walls. I could hear my upstairs neighbor's television through most nights. A parking spot I paid for but didn't own, on a lease that reset the terms every 12 months like a small, polite threat. A lease renewal email already sitting in my inbox, unopened, sitting there like a collar waiting to be buckled back on. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time before I went inside. Long enough that the engine ticked as it cooled. I opened my notes app. 3 lines, typed slowly, like I was writing orders on a chart. Buy quiet. Tell no one. No family meeting. This wasn't a tantrum plan. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds if you strip out the years leading up to it. This was an exit from the waiting room. They had given Brent a key to adulthood, handed to him across a dinner table with an audience, and handed me a story about how renting suited my personality, as if geography and stability were a matter of taste, like preferring tea over coffee. I thought about calling someone that night, a friend, a coworker, anyone who might tell me I was allowed to be angry about it. I didn't. I've noticed that the version of me who calls someone in the heat of a moment is usually looking for permission to feel something, and I already had permission. I'd had it for years. What I didn't have yet was a plan, and a feeling without a plan just evaporates by Tuesday. I looked around that 1-bedroom apartment that night with new eyes, cataloging it the way I catalog a patient on intake, thin walls, borrowed square footage, a lease that could be non-renewed on someone else's whim. None of it was a character flaw. It had just been a placeholder for far longer than anyone in my family had bothered to notice, and placeholders, I decided right there on my second-hand couch, have expiration dates. I don't let other people write my housing status as a character trait. Not anymore. If you're waiting for the part where I announce my intentions at Christmas, gather everyone around the tree and make a speech about self-respect, that's not this channel, and it was never going to be my plan. Announcement is how families sabotage you with opinions. The second you say the sentence out loud, everyone in the room gets a vote, and somehow it's never the vote you wanted. So I made rules, and I kept them the way I keep a med schedule, precisely, without negotiation. No cryptic social media posts hinting that something was coming. No big news soon texts to build anticipation I didn't need anyone else to share in. No asking mom to just co-sign moral support, because moral support in my family had a way of turning into moral surveillance within about a week. One person at work could know, my charge nurse, Priya, and only because my schedule needed covering for a few appointments, not blood, not family, just someone who needed to know why I was suddenly requesting Tuesday mornings off. Every dollar had a job before it hit my account. Feelings could wait in the hallway until the paperwork was finished. I wasn't building a revenge mansion. I want to say that plainly, because I know how these stories can get twisted into something uglier than they were. I was building a door that opened with my key, and only my key, and I wasn't going to let anyone talk me out of the blueprint before the foundation was even poured. I also made myself a rule about resentment, separate from the silence rules, because I noticed early on how easily one could curdle into the other. Once a week, usually on a slow Sunday morning, I let myself feel exactly as angry as I wanted about the envelope, about same season, about braces I never got and a transmission I paid off alone on a bus schedule. I gave it 30 minutes, timer and everything, the way you'd give a wound air before rebandaging it. Then I closed it back up and went back to the numbers, because anger without a container just leaks into everything, and I needed every part of myself clear-headed for what I was building. There were nights that rule got tested. My best friend from nursing school, Denise, asked me over drinks one night why I'd suddenly gone quiet about my personal life, why I kept steering conversations back to her instead of talking about mine. I almost told her. I got as far as I'm working on something, before I caught myself and changed the subject to her terrible ex-boyfriend, which, mercifully, is a topic that can fill any silence indefinitely. I even wrote a rule for what to do if someone asked me directly, point blank, whether I was saving for a house. Deflect once, answer honestly the second time, but only with the smallest truthing available. I'm saving, yeah, always saving something, which was true, and told them nothing at all about the size or the shape of what I was actually building. Mom tested it too, though she never knew she was testing anything. She'd call on my days off and ask, almost idly, whether I'd thought any more about maybe finding a nicer rental, somewhere with a little more space, her voice light, like she was suggesting a haircut. I'd tell her I was thinking about it. Technically true. I thought about it constantly, just not in the direction she assumed. Every one of those calls went straight into the same mental folder as everything else, filed, dated, not forgotten. I'm going to be specific here, because I deal in specific. Vague resolve doesn't buy a house. Numbers do. Target down payment, a hard figure, written on a sticky note stuck to my bathroom mirror, so it was the first thing I saw every morning before a shift and the last thing I saw every night after one. Timeline, 18 months of nights if I stayed soft about my own comfort. 15 months if I got mean about it. I picked mean. I picked up every overtime block my unit offered and a few my unit didn't officially offer until I asked. Extra weekends, holidays other nurses were desperate to trade away, the ones nobody wants because they cost you Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve with your family, which, in my case, felt less like a sacrifice and more like a mercy. I sold the nicer car, the one I'd been proud of for exactly 11 months, and bought a reliable, ugly, paid-for sedan that never once complained about the miles I put on it driving to and from 12-hour shifts. I packed lunches that looked like punishment, the same rotation of rice and beans and whatever protein was on sale, while my coworkers ordered delivery in the break room and asked if I wanted to split something. Vacation days, the ones I was owed, the ones a reasonable person would have used to rest, turned into sleep and second shifts instead, because rest doesn't build equity and I had exactly one thing on my mind. People at work asked if I was okay, more than once, in that careful tone coworkers use when they think you might be running from something. I told them the truth, or close enough to it. I'm buying something that doesn't require my parents' permission. Most of them laughed, assuming I was joking. A few of them, the ones who'd lived a version of my story themselves, just nodded and left it alone, which I appreciated more than they probably realized. My charge nurse Priya was one of those few. She never asked follow-up questions, but she started quietly making sure I got first pick on the overtime sign-up sheet. No explanation needed between us, just one tired woman making room for another one's plan. I never told her what the plan actually was until months after closing, and when I finally did, over coffee in the break room, she just said, "Good," and went back to her charting, which was somehow the most supportive reaction I got from anyone that whole year. They understood more than my family ever had, and they'd known me for a fraction of the time. Somewhere around month 9, I hit the halfway point on the sticky note, and I remember standing in my bathroom that morning, toothbrush in hand, just staring at the number for a full minute like it might rearrange itself into something smaller. It didn't. It was exactly, mathematically, half of what I needed, which meant 9 more months of exactly what I'd already been doing, no shortcuts, no lucky breaks, nothing but the same overtime and the same ugly reliable car and the same rice and beans lunches stretching out ahead of me like a hallway with no windows. I remember feeling, for about an hour that day, genuinely unsure I could finish it. Then I went to work, and a patient needed me, and the feeling had nowhere left to sit, so it left. Every paycheck, I watched the balance climb like a quiet accusation, growing in a spreadsheet only I ever opened. Not against Brent. I want to be honest about that. Never against Brent specifically, not really. Against the sentence. Against 4 words that had been handed to me across a dinner table like they were a kindness. Rent somewhere. Every dollar I moved into that account felt like I was writing a rebuttal nobody had asked me to write, one deposit at a time. There's one shift in particular I still think about from that stretch, a night about 10 months in when I was running on maybe 5 hours of sleep and my 3rd overtime shift of the week. An older woman came through, a fall at home, and her daughter sat in the hallway the whole night, holding her mother's coat in her lap like a stuffed animal, terrified. I sat with her for a few minutes between checks and she thanked me, said I was so calm, so steady, that she didn't know how I did it. I remember thinking, on the drive home at 6 in the morning, sun coming up over the highway, that steady wasn't a personality trait I was born with. It was a discipline I'd been assigned since childhood, the same discipline my family had been quietly billing me for my whole life without ever once paying it back. That morning, I opened my banking app before I even took my shoes off and moved another $200 into the account, just to prove to myself the discipline was mine now, spent on my own behalf for once. Meanwhile, Instagram did what Instagram does, which is to say, it kept broadcasting a version of the story that made me look invisible in my own family's narrative. Open house selfies, Brent and Ashley standing in an empty living room with their arms around each other like they were posing for a real estate ad. Paint swatches taped to a wall, 5 shades of a gray that all looked identical to me. A grill in the backyard big enough to feed a block party, still wrapped in its factory plastic in one of the photos. Ashley's caption under one particular post has stuck with me longer than I'd like to admit. Mom and Dad made this possible, loudly crying face. We don't deserve them. They invited me to the housewarming. Not as equity in the celebration. As catering adjacent family. Can you bring a salad? You're so good at the practical stuff, Ashley texted me, with a little green salad emoji at the end, as if that made it sweeter instead of smaller. I typed back a thumbs up and set my phone face down on the counter for a minute before I could look at it again without my jaw tightening. I brought the salad. I walked through rooms funded by an envelope that had sailed past me at a dinner table without so much as a pause, and I told them, honestly, that the house was beautiful, because it was. I complimented the kitchen island. I admired the primary bathroom soaking tub, the kind with jets, the kind I made a private note to skip entirely when the time came, because I'd never once in my life had the leisure to sit in a bath for 45 minutes and I wasn't about to start pretending I would. I did not say the sentence sitting underneath all of it, I am building one without an audience, and you will not see a single beam of it until it's finished. Brent put an arm around me for a photo near the fireplace, that easy, confident half-hug he'd been giving me since we were kids, and said, loud enough for the room, couldn't have done it without family. A few of his friends were near us for that photo, and one of them, a guy I didn't recognize, turned to me afterward and said, friendly, no idea what he was stepping into, you must be so proud of your brother. This is a serious house for his age. I told him I was proud, and it wasn't even entirely a lie, because Brent hadn't done anything wrong by accepting a gift that was offered to him. The wrongness, if there was any, belonged to the people doing the offering, not to the person standing in the kitchen accepting it with both hands. Family. Such a selective noun, in that house. It apparently meant the people who wrote the check, and it apparently meant me, when a salad needed carrying. Thanksgiving came a few weeks later, right in the middle of my leanest, hungriest stretch of saving, the stretch where every unnecessary purchase felt like a small betrayal of the sticky note on my mirror. Mom carved the turkey and carved me in the same breath, the way she always managed to do without seeming to notice she was doing it at all. See, Jordan? Renting is smarter for you. No stress. You're free. Brent has the pressure of a real house. Real house. As if my rent check, the one I wrote every single month without fail, without a single late payment in 6 years, was somehow imaginary money, monopoly currency that didn't count toward anything real. I felt the speech rise in my throat that night, hot and detailed and righteous, every fact I'd ever filed away rising up all at once, demanding a hearing right there over the cranberry sauce. I swallowed it with water instead. I remember the exact sensation, my jaw tight, my hands steady around the glass, because if I spilled everything then, at that table, they'd turn my plan into a debate before it was even finished being built. And debates, in my family, are how the people with the most volume win time they never actually earned. Dad added his own line a minute later, not even looking up from carving the second half of the bird. Some people just aren't built for the responsibility of owning something. Nothing wrong with that. I don't think he meant it as cruelly as it landed. I think, in his mind, it was almost a comfort, a way of telling me I was exempt from a burden. In my chest, it landed like a verdict handed down before the trial had even started. Aunt Carol, God bless her, tried to lighten things by asking if I was seeing anyone, and Mom answered for me before I could open my mouth, said something about how I didn't have time for that kind of thing right now, between shifts, which was, unintentionally, the single most accurate sentence anyone said at that table all night, for reasons none of them understood. Silence, that day, wasn't weakness. I need you to hear that clearly. Silence was drywall. It was framing. It was a foundation pour that nobody in that dining room was invited to attend, because it wasn't theirs to witness yet. I've thought a lot since then about why that particular Thanksgiving stuck with me harder than most of the others. I think it's because Real House was the moment the story stopped being about money and started being about legitimacy, about which of us was allowed to want a life that looked solid from the outside, and which of us was supposed to be satisfied with looking practical instead. I drove home from that dinner with leftovers I didn't want in a container Mom insisted I take, and I sat in my car outside my apartment for a while before going in, the way I'd started doing more and more that year. I checked the balance on my phone, right there in the dark parking lot, watch the number sit steady and real and entirely mine, and let that be the reply I never gave out loud at the table. If you're in a season of strategic silence right now, you're not crazy, and you're not a coward. You're under construction. Quick pause. If this is hitting a nerve, do two things before you confront anyone about fairness: write your number and protect your timeline. Fairness arguments without a plan behind them are just louder waiting rooms, and I'd already spent enough years in one of those. Okay. Back to it. It wasn't the first place I made an offer on. There was a small blue house 2 neighborhoods over that I loved instantly and lost to a cash buyer within 4 days, and I let myself grieve that one for exactly one evening, alone, with a frozen pizza, before I got back on the listings the next morning. There was a fixer-upper with a foundation issue and inspector flag that would have swallowed every dollar I'd saved in that account and then some, and walking away from that one felt like its own small victory, proof I could want something badly and still say no when the numbers didn't work. Offer accepted. Not a palace. Not a headline-worthy compound. A solid starter place in a zip code I could actually afford on the life I actually live, shift work, overtime, no fairy godparents standing by with an envelope. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with decent light in the mornings when I got home from a night shift, a small backyard that needed work I was already looking forward to doing myself. Inspection. Lender. Appraisal. I sat through every single one of those appointments alone, on my days off, sometimes still in scrubs because I'd come straight from a shift. The appraisal came back a few thousand under the asking price, which meant one more round of negotiating I had to handle by myself, over email, late at night between shifts, going back and forth with a seller's agent who had no idea she was negotiating against a woman running on 4 hours of sleep and pure will. We landed on a number I could actually live with. Every document that came back said Jordan Hale. No and family. No pending parental vibes. Just me, on every line that mattered. Closing day looked like a conference room with bad coffee and a notary who had absolutely no idea my brother existed, who had no idea any of this history existed, who just needed my signature in the right places and my ID matched against the file in front of her. I signed until my hand cramped, page after page, initialing where I was told to initial, half listening to the closing agent explain terms I'd already read 4 times on my own at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. At one point she asked, making conversation while she stacked papers into order, whether this was my first house. I said yes. She said congratulations, the way people say it to strangers, warm but generic, and it was somehow one of the more genuine congratulations I'd received in the entire process. When they slid the keys across at the end, they were on a plain metal ring. No monogram. No ceremony. No dad reaching into a sideboard with a flourish. No mom explaining seasons to a room full of people nodding along. I held the key in my palm and laughed once, quiet, disbelieving, clean, the kind of laugh that surprises the person doing it. The title company woman glanced up and asked, kindly, if I had family joining me for the moment. No, I said. They're busy celebrating someone else's closing. I wasn't bitter when I said it. I was accurate, and there's a real difference between the two, even if it doesn't always sound like one from the outside. I sat in my car in the new driveway for a long time after the closing agent's office, not going inside yet, just looking at a house that had a mortgage statement with my name on it and nobody else's. I called exactly no one. I ate a gas station sandwich in the driver's seat, key sitting on the dashboard, and let that be enough of a celebration for one afternoon. For a few weeks after, I let the old story keep running exactly as they'd written it. Mail forwarding quietly set up. Same group chat, same rhythm of memes and check-ins. Same how's the apartment, small talk from mom on our Sunday phone calls. If she asked about the lease, I said it was handled. Handled is a wonderful word, I've learned. It means whatever the listener needs it to mean, and nobody ever asks a follow-up question to a word that sounds finished. I went to Brent's for a backyard thing a few weeks after my own closing and sat in a chair I didn't own, eating burgers paid for, indirectly, by a gift I hadn't received, and felt strangely steady the entire evening. Grounded, even. Because 2 towns over, my name was already on a different piece of paper, a piece of paper none of them had read yet, and that certainty sat in my chest like ballast. There was a moment that day, Ashley showing off a new patio set, that almost undid the whole thing. She turned to me, mid-tour, and asked, not unkindly, "Don't you ever get tired of moving around every year or two? Doesn't it wear on you?" I told her honestly that I didn't move around that much, that I liked stability as much as anyone. She nodded, satisfied, clearly picturing my 1-bedroom rental, clearly not picturing the mortgage statement sitting in a drawer in a house she'd never seen. Secrets aren't always shame. I want to say that clearly, because I know some of you are wondering if what I did was dishonest. Sometimes secrets are just unfinished installs, load-bearing walls you don't show anyone until the inspection's already passed. I'm not going to invent a soap opera for you, because the truth didn't need embellishing. I'll tell you what showed up in the real world, plainly. An adjustable rate mortgage that stopped being cute the way adjustable rates always eventually do. A job hop that came with a pay cut nobody in the family mentioned out loud at dinner. A lifestyle that still, somehow, thought it had a $60,000 cushion sitting behind it indefinitely. Ashley's taste in kitchen renovations and quarterly furniture refreshes hadn't gotten the memo about the new math. Mom started using a new voice on the phone with me, a voice I recognized instantly because I'd cataloged every version of her voice over 34 years. The fundraising voice. "Just a bridge," she'd say, testing the phrase out. "Family helps family. You're so good with money, Jordan." One call ran longer than the others. She walked me through the numbers the way she thought I'd want them, careful and rehearsed, clearly coached by Dad beforehand. The rate reset, she explained, had added almost $600 to their monthly payment. Ashley had put a home office renovation on a card before the rate hit, thinking the cushion would still be there. "It's not that they're irresponsible," Mom said, quickly, defensively, before I'd said anything at all. "It's just tight right now. Temporarily." I said I understood, because I did understand, more than she knew. I understood exactly how a family could hand someone an amount of money like that and never once model what happens when the ground underneath it shifts. There it was. When they needed a wallet, I wasn't a renter personality anymore, too impractical and unsettled to be trusted with real responsibility. I was infrastructure again, dependable, load-bearing, exactly like I'd always been whenever something needed holding up. I filed the calls in my notes, the same app that still had "by quiet" sitting 3 lines from the top. I did not send money. I did not explain why yet. Timing, I'd learned working nights in an ICU, is a tool just like any other, and you don't waste it by using it too early. Around that same stretch, I heard secondhand, through Aunt Carol, that Brent had quietly asked about refinancing and been turned down, his credit already stretched thin from the renovation card and the second one he'd opened for furniture. Nobody told me that directly. Nobody told me anything directly anymore, now that I wasn't useful in the specific way they were used to. I just kept building, kept saving, kept letting the silence do the work silence does best. It's a strange thing, watching a family's math come due from the outside, especially when you're the one-line item they'd already crossed off the spreadsheet. Some part of me, the part that will always be a nurse before anything else, genuinely hoped they'd figure it out on their own, find a way to right-size the mortgage or the renovations before it became a crisis. Another part of me, the part that had ridden a cold bus at 4 a.m. for 6 straight weeks, just kept its hands folded and waited. Family meeting. Their idea, called on a Tuesday with an urgency that told me everything before anyone said a word. Their dining table. Same chairs, including mine, wobble and all. I knew, walking in, roughly what was coming. I'd had weeks to prepare for it, weeks of Mom's fundraising voice on the phone building toward exactly this moment. I sat down in my old chair anyway, let it wobble the same way it always had, and waited for them to get to the point in their own time. Brent looked smaller somehow when I walked in, not in body, in certainty. He'd lost the easy confidence I remembered from the housewarming photo, the arm around the shoulder swagger of a man who'd never once had to ask anyone for anything. He kept turning his water glass in small circles on the table without drinking from it, a habit I hadn't seen from him since he was a teenager waiting on a report card. Dad did the throat clear, the same one from the night of the envelope, and for a second the symmetry of it almost made me laugh. We need to talk options. Brent's numbers are tight. Jordan, you've always been fine. You've got that nursing income, stable. We need you to help. Co-sign. Or a bridge loan. Something. Mom reached across the table for my hand, her rings cool against my knuckles. You're so responsible. This is what sisters do. Ashley added her own line, quieter, aimed more at the table than at me. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I believed her. Nobody at that table had ever once, in 34 years, watched me sit through a request like this without eventually caving, and I could see, in the set of their shoulders, that they were confident this time would be no different, that history was on their side. That was almost the strangest part of the whole evening, that I believed every word of their fear and still felt no obligation attached to it. I looked at the exact spot on that table where an envelope had once traveled away from me like I was furniture nobody needed to consult. I need you to hear me carefully, I said, keeping my voice level, the same voice I use when a family needs to hear something they don't want to hear. I stopped renting. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my bag and set 3 things on the wood, one at a time, in order. A closing disclosure, first pages. A deed and title printout with my name typed clean across it. A utility bill from my new address, dated, ordinary, undeniable. No monologue first. Documents first. Paper, I've found, has a way of ending mythology faster than any speech ever could. Mom's face did a kind of glitch, a half-second where she genuinely didn't seem to know what she was looking at. Dad leaned in like the print might rearrange itself if he squinted hard enough. Brent laughed once, the fake kind, reflexive, and then stopped himself halfway through the sound. Nobody spoke for what felt like a full minute, which in a house that rarely went quiet for anyone, was its own kind of confession. I let the silence sit there exactly as long as it needed to, because I'd spent an entire year learning how to let silence do its work without rushing to fill it for everyone else's comfort. You bought? Ashley said, from the doorway, like I'd confessed to something criminal instead of something ordinary that grown adults do every day. I closed, I said. Months of nights. My name. My loan. My key. Dad picked up the deed printout first, turned it over like there might be a second page contradicting the first, then set it back down exactly where I'd placed it, careful, almost respectful despite himself. Dad found anger fastest, the way he always did, because in our house anger had always been easier to reach for than shame. You lied to this family. I tapped the exact place on the table where the envelope had once sat, right where Brent's hand had once closed around it. You kept a $60,000 secret in an envelope, I said. I kept a deed. The room tried, in real time, to rewrite me into something they could argue with. Secretive. Cold. Vindictive. Dramatic. I watched them reach for each word, one after another, and I let them try, because none of it changed what was sitting on the table between us. Ashley picked up the utility bill at one point, read the address twice like she was checking it against some internal map of the county, and set it back down without a word, which told me more than anything she could have said. Then I gave them the only translation that actually mattered. You told me to rent somewhere. I declined the assignment. Guilt came next. It always does, in my experience, right after control starts to slip through someone's fingers. Family doesn't keep secrets. We would have helped you if you'd asked. This is going to destroy Brent's confidence. I answered one at a time, short, the way you answer questions in triage when there isn't time for a paragraph. Somewhere in the middle of it, I noticed I wasn't shaking. That surprised me more than anything else that evening. Every argument I'd ever had in that house before this one had ended with my hands trembling under the table where nobody could see. This time my hands stayed still, folded in front of me on top of my own deed, and that stillness told me more clearly than any speech could have that something in the balance of that room had actually, permanently shifted. Family kept a secret with a cashier's check. I did ask. You told me my season was rent. Brent's confidence isn't my mortgage. Dad tried once more, a different tack, quieter. We could have all done this together. As a family, the right way. I told him the right way had been on the table 3 years earlier, in the form of a question I'd asked plainly, at that same table, and answered for me with a sentence about seasons before I'd even finished asking it. Brent went soft first, then sharp, in that order I'd watched him move through since we were kids. So you're just going to watch me sink? I'm going to watch you talk to the people who funded your down payment, I said. I'm not your second envelope. He pushed back from the table, not violently, just enough to put distance between us, and said something quieter, almost to himself. I never asked them to skip you. That wasn't me. I told him I believed that, and I did, mostly. But I also told him that not asking for the unfairness and not questioning it once it landed in his hands were two very different postures, and he'd spent 3 years comfortably occupying the second one. Mom cried, quietly, into a napkin she'd pulled from the holder in the center of the table. I handed her a fresh one when the first went through. I did not hand her a cosign, and I felt no need to apologize for the difference between the two gestures. I stood before the conversation could turn into a 3-hour rewrite of my entire childhood, before everyone in that room could start editing the story into something more comfortable for them. Terms, once clear, delivered the way I'd deliver discharge instructions to a family that needed to actually hear them and not just nod along. I will not cosign. I will not match the gift. I will not become the emergency fund for a lifestyle that was built on unequal math from the very beginning. I will do dinner, on my calendar, at my place, if the invitation is about relationship and not extraction. I will keep loving this family from a distance I get to set, instead of one that gets set for me over a salad bowl. Dad called me cold, the same word he'd been reaching for in different forms all evening. Mom tried a softer angle, said this wasn't who she raised, that family was supposed to stretch for each other. I told her, as gently as I could manage with my pulse still up, that I'd been stretching for this family since I was 16 years old with a crooked smile I never got to fix, and that stretching had apparently only ever run in one direction. I told him the truth in one line, and I meant every word of it. Clarity feels cold when you've been living on someone else's heat. Then I picked up my documents, my bag, and my quieter, sturdier future, and I left the house where I'd once been told, so casually, over a salad bowl, to go rent somewhere. First morning fully alone in my own kitchen. Coffee that tasted, somehow, like a decision. Sun coming across a floor I owned a genuine portion of, in the boring, beautiful, bank-understood way that no envelope could have ever handed me. Mom texted, carefully, a few days later. "Can we see it?" I said yes. They came on a Saturday, almost like tourists in a town they used to run. Mom touched the kitchen counter like she was testing whether it was real. Dad checked the window seals the way he used to check my report cards, looking for a flaw that might restore the old hierarchy, some small crack he could point to and say, "See, you needed us after all." There wasn't one. He stood in the backyard for a while at the end, looking at the fence line, and said, gruffly, not quite meeting my eyes, "Good bones on this place." From my father, that was as close to an apology as I was ever going to get, and I decided, standing there, that I was willing to let it count as one. Brent didn't come. That was information too, and I let it sit exactly where it landed instead of chasing after an explanation. He did call, about a month later, on a random Wednesday, no agenda I could detect. We talked about nothing in particular for 20 minutes, an old show we'd both started watching, a stupid work story from his end. Neither of us mentioned the deed or the envelope or the dinner. At the very end, right before he hung up, he said, "The place looked good." In the pictures Mom showed me. That was as close as he ever came to acknowledging any of it directly, and I decided that was allowed to be enough, at least for now. Some doors you leave unlocked even when you're not ready to walk all the way through them. I didn't chase him. I also didn't send a gloating photo to the family group chat, no triumphant shot of the key on the counter with a caption dripping in vindication. Victory laps are how you become the villain in someone else's version of this story, and I'd spent enough years being cast in roles I never auditioned for. Some nights, still, coming home from a shift as the sky starts to go gray over my own street, I think about that dinner table, the envelope, the salad bowl Mom talked to instead of me. I don't think about it with the same heat anymore. It's more like checking an old scar, just to confirm it healed the way it was supposed to. It did. I already had the only trophy I actually wanted. A key on a plain ring, sitting on my own counter, in my own kitchen, in a house that had never once needed anyone's permission but mine. I still work nights. I still keep people alive between midnight and dawn, still live on 12-hour blocks and bad coffee, because that part of me was never the thing that needed fixing. What changed is smaller than people expect and bigger than it sounds. I come home now to a door that's actually mine, in a house that nobody handed me across a dinner table, that nobody can ever tell me I only deserve a smaller version of. Some mornings, sitting at my own kitchen table with the sun coming in, I still think about the fork stopping halfway to my mouth that Sunday, and I let myself feel, just for a second, exactly how far a person can travel starting from a sentence meant to shrink her. Here's the verdict. I think about the 16-year-old version of me sometimes, the one with the crooked smile and the estimate sitting on the kitchen table, told to wait and see how the year went. I wish I could tell her the year was going to keep going that way for a long time, but that eventually the waiting would end on her own terms, with her own name on her own paperwork. I think she'd have believed me, even back then. She was always tougher than anyone gave her credit for. Fair is not always equal. And unequal gifts are not your personality assignment, no matter how many times someone tells you otherwise across a dinner table. If they hand your sibling a future in an envelope and hand you a story about how smaller living suits you, believe the envelope, not the story. The envelope is the truth. The story is just the packaging they use so it doesn't sound like what it actually is. Then build anyway. Quietly, if you have to. Completely on paper. Without waiting for the people who underestimated you to become fair on their own timeline. You can still love your family. You can still pass the salad and show up for the birthdays and mean it when you do. You just don't have to rent your whole life to keep their myth intact, and you don't owe anyone a smaller story just because a bigger one would make them uncomfortable at dinner. If this sat in your chest tonight, you're in the right place. This is calm verdict. Quiet power. Final justice. On the record. Subscribe if you want more stories that settle the score without screaming. And tell me, in one word, were you told to rent, or did you go get the deed? I read every one. I'll see you in the next one.